Hi, Yvonne. Thank you. I think there is more to it than just what we see. Obviously, all Greek prime ministers and ministers of culture have talked about this since the 1980s. Obviously, Greece is UK's most stable and staunch ally in the Mediterranean. And obviously, British prime ministers consistently have hidden behind the trustees of the British Museum when the issue has been posed. So I don't think that there was a real issue about cancelling the meeting. My read, and obviously I'm not a political analyst, I'm an archaeologist, but my read to this is that actually the British Prime Minister was not trying to send a message to Greece, but he was actually trying to send a message to a small constituency of his voters that are hardliners on this issue. And obviously this is not even the general British public, because as we know, the British people are actually in favor of the return of the Elgin marbles. And so I think there is politics in this and not really the argument of this topic. But what has happened, and I think this is quite interesting for your listeners, is that actually the British Prime Minister for the first time has shown that the British government is responsible for these talks. And so for the first time we have a British Prime Minister indirectly claiming responsibility for these talks and not passing the book to the trustees of the British Museum. Consistently, British Prime Ministers, before they become Prime Ministers, they are in favor of return and in favor of unification. When they come to office, they say, oh, the British Museum is an independent institution, yet an institution that is funded largely by the British taxpayer and the British government.
So how do you think this can move forward then? And what would it mean to Greece to have these marbles back? What is the significance of these sculptures to Greece?
Well, the general context nowadays, because very different from how it was in the 1980s when the issue was first raised. Now we are talking about an avalanche of restitutions as signs of good gesture, or as signs of public diplomacy, or as amendments made for the colonial era by multiple European museums, mainly towards Africa. And so the context is extremely different from what it was when the issue was raised in the 80s. And as a result, now the British Museum finds itself in a very difficult position, especially after the delayed to be announced challenge of the theft of approximately 2,000 objects from its storerooms. And so I think that at the moment the British Museum has a tremendous opportunity with the marbles. And the tremendous opportunities that actually Greece is not asking for everything back, is just asking for the reunification of its own national symbol. And so returning things to Greece would be a tremendous opportunity for the British Museum to divert public opinion from the avalanche of restitutions and create opportunities for public diplomacy in Europe as a great sign of goodwill to a very ancient ally of the UK.
What solutions are there to potentially solve this and similar disputes from a legal point of view? Can an international court decide on these matters?
There can be arbitration, as far as I am concerned. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an archaeologist, so there can be arbitration, and there have been talks about legal solutions. I think the legal argument, both sides believe they could win, but ultimately this is a moral and a political decision, and I think the British government is having a huge opportunity in its hands if they want to change the situation. At the moment we have tens of countries' heritage being stored and displayed in the British Museum, in a museum called British, that claims to be global. And at the moment, this looks very wrong in a different environment of post-colonialism and decolonizing museums. It's a very big program in the UK at the moment.
So just finally, what are your hopes for the future of such artefacts, including the Parthenon marbles?
So there are many arguments in favor of global museums, but the Parthenon marbles are really a national symbol. It's arguably more famous than the Greek flag. So I think the arguments for reunification are tremendous. And I think that a lot of the countries that were occupied by empires or colonized by empires really have a right of ownership, even though they might actually eventually decide that once they have the ownership, they might want to lend them to museums, such as the Louvre, the British Museum, and so on and so forth. And so I think it's the intellectual property that these countries want, and they want to ultimately decide what they are to do with their own cultural heritage, which is part of their sovereignty.
Dr. Evangelos Kyriakidis, thank you so much. Very interesting to talk.
Thank you very much, Yvonne.